There we go. All right. Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us here on our virtual Café Sci. My name's Shelby Bradford. I'm a staff member with the Science Center, and we're very excited to have you all this evening for our talk. Before I introduce our speaker, we just want to recognize our sponsors. So Café Sci is presented with the help of PPG and is also supported by our wonderful audience attendees. So thank you to everyone who is able to make a donation to support this program. But even if you're not able to donate financially, the best support that we can have is you inviting your friends, your relatives, your colleagues, whoever you know, to come out and join us for a future Café Sci event. We take place the first Monday of each month, unless there's a holiday, in which case we'll catch you the next week. And you can register for next month's speaker at carnegiesciencecenter.org. And so before we move into our speaker, I also want to remind everyone that you can ask questions by using the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom window, and you can enter those anytime during the presentation, and then we'll take them at the end. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, Heather Hulton VanTassel. She is an environmental conservationist who is passionate about nature-based solutions that lead to the sustainability of our planet and the equality for all. Heather's passions began in a small rural community in western Pennsylvania and flourished as a first-generation college student at Carlow University, where she majored in biology. She then went on to earn her doctorate degree in evolution, ecology, and organismal biology at the University in California, Riverside. She's held positions at UCR's Center for Conservation Biology, the Audubon, South Carolina, the Nature Conservancy in South Carolina, and Carnegie Museum of Natural History. Heather's had formal training and certification as a master naturalist in South Carolina's Low Country and as a project management professional, wetland delineator, and diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace practitioner. So Heather has a strong passion for both the environment and equity and believes that working towards sustainability also requires an equal effort towards social and environmental justice. In her free time, Heather enjoys hiking, spending time with her friends, family, and pets, and of course, recreation on our three rivers. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to her and let us hear more.
Great. Thank you. Thank you all for taking the time out of your Monday evening, especially after the holiday. I'm sure you're all tired, so I really appreciate you taking the time to learn a little bit about our three rivers. I'm going to share my screen now, and we'll go ahead and get started. Well, thank you so much for the introduction. So my name is Heather Hulton VanTassel. I'm the Executive Director of Rivers Waterkeeper. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about applying the science into the real world situation for protecting our environment. Rivers Waterkeeper is a nonprofit organization. We are based in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We serve southwestern PA, and I'll talk a little bit about where we serve and protect our water quality. Our mission is to protect the water quality of the Monongahela, Allegheny, and Ohio rivers, and their respective watersheds. So we really like to think about our waterways as whole watersheds, and all of our land activities really do impact our water quality. And so it's not just what we do on the water, but what we do around the water that impacts it as well. We have this ultimate vision of drinkable, fishable, and swimmable waters in our three rivers and our watersheds. We were founded in 2009, so we've been doing this for some time, and we serve as both a scientific and legal advocate for our community when it comes to water protection and enforcement of our clean water laws. We also are part of the member of the Waterkeeper Alliance. So when you see the keeper title next to some body of water like Bay Keeper, Coast Keeper, River Keeper, you're going to be thinking of the Waterkeeper Alliance. So there's over 300 of us across the globe with our exclusive jurisdictions. We all work together to really enforce clean water laws and really move towards the clean water movement. So when you think about, okay, well where do you serve? Don't worry too much. You don't have to see very detailed information on this map. But in this center where my, well, you can't see my arrow, but in the center there's Pittsburgh. And then you have our three rivers that go out from there. And you'll see that we don't follow political boundaries when we think about where we serve. Rather, we follow watersheds. Now, down in the bottom right corner, you see a little jet out there, and that's the Allegheny watershed. And we're really lucky in this region to not only just have one waterkeeper, us serving Three Rivers, but we also have our sister waterkeeper, the Allegheny Riverkeeper, who does amazing work in the Yacht watershed. But we also partner a lot on projects that overlap in our areas and jurisdiction. And I want to go into a little bit bigger picture as well. Why do we care about our Three Rivers? Well, to be honest, it ultimately unites 30 million people across the United States. Okay, so in our region, we serve as the headwaters of the Ohio River Basin. And here is a picture of just how large the Ohio River Basin reaches. Just in the Allegheny River alone, the U.S. Forest Service has documented 200 birds, 25 amphibians, 20 reptiles, 80 fishes, 25 freshwater mussels. Across this basin, it's 205,000 square miles, covers those 15 states that you see outlined, and goes from New York down to Mississippi. And one thing I want to point out is that it doesn't just end at the Mississippi River. All of our water flows into the Mississippi River, which eventually will lead out into the Gulf and into the ocean. Our water really is connected, and everything we do upstream impacts all of our neighbors downstream as we serve as the headwaters of the Ohio River Basin. The Ohio River Basin also supplies drinking water to 5 million people. And so that's a little fun fact a lot of people don't think about for those who live in the Pittsburgh region. We oftentimes see our rivers as this beautiful thing we watch the fireworks over, but it's a far distant thing. We don't think about it too much. But that's exactly where most of us are getting our drinking water from. So it's really important and critical that we protect that source water. We also have a lot of really fun and interesting things about our rivers. I could go on for hours about all the amazing things and abundant resources our rivers provide, but I picked out a few that I thought you guys might like. One, Pittsburgh was originally known as the gateway to the West because our river does flow into the Mississippi River. In 1811, the first steamboat was built in Pittsburgh. We became known as the Steel City and has what really set us up for success in our region economically. The Monongahela River was the first fully navigable river in the U.S., which is a pretty amazing feat. But our rivers have really changed over time. In fact, our rivers at one point were considered devoid of aquatic life, particularly the Mon River. And this is because over 50 years ago, before we had clean water laws, industries could pretty much do whatever they wanted to the rivers. And prior to our clean water laws, we actually saw die-offs in our rivers. Sometimes it was chemically based. In our region, we had a lot of issues with temperature-based pollution. So we had all the still mills dumping really hot water into our cold rivers. Now the aquatic life has really grown and evolved to thrive in cold waters. And so when it was hot all year, we saw a massive die-out in our aquatic communities. However, 52 years ago, well, nearly 52 years ago, the United States did a precedent legislation, the Clean Water Act. And that's really been allowing us to regulate pollution that goes into our rivers. And since then, we've seen a comeback on each one of those three rivers. In fact, all of them support mussels, so the bottom of the food chain, all the way up to our iconic American bald eagle at the top. So, as mentioned, we're Three Rivers Waterkeeper and we work to protect the water quality. So how do we do that? What does that mean for us? Well, the first thing we do is we're on the water. We're being that scientific and legal advocate. We're generally monitoring and patrolling our waterways, looking for pollution, looking for really great stories, looking for the positive things as well. We also do targeted monitoring and pollution response. So we have some targeted industrial sites that we know tend to see pollution and we report that. And then sometimes communities let us know that they find pollution and we go and respond to that as well. We work in the community. So like I'm doing here today, I'm going to talk about what we do, why we do it, and how you might be able to get involved. And it's really important that we work to connect community members back to their water. We can do all this work. We can collect all this data. But if we don't have the community wanting cleaner water, wanting to protect what we do have, then there's not really much we can do about it. We really need that community backing, that grassroots support that we need to make really great change for our water quality. And finally, we work in the advocacy side. Now, a lot of people think of advocacy solely as, going and talking to legislators and trying to make change on that end. But there's so much more to it. We do clean water laws enforcement. So I mentioned the Clean Water Act. And so we can file citizenship provisions, which I'll talk about later. And we really work to hold polluters accountable. And so putting pressure on our environmental regulators to do a job at holding those polluters accountable. We're first going to talk a little bit about on the water and what we do and what that might look like. So we do monitoring, patrolling, targeted monitoring, pollution response. We do it visually, and we take water samples as well. And those water samples, we can do in situ water samples. So we have a water monitoring device that we can take samples in the field. And then other things, we do have to take samples and send off to a lab for analysis. We monitor by foot and by boat. So we do have a Waterkeeper vessel. There are opportunities to get out on that and come out and have a day with us. And we do it on by foot as well. And so we go out and do some of those smaller tributaries. And there's also some locations in our main stem rivers that we can access by foot as well. And so when we think about water quality, we're often thinking about what might negatively impact it. And that's going to be pollution. And so where does pollution come from? Here's a really cute diagram of where the pollution can come from. It is a little complex though. What you want to see is there's many ways that pollution can impact our water quality. We can have oil spills from barges, from industry. We can have sludge, sewage entering our waterways. We can have runoff from urban environments. We can have runoff from our agriculture. We can have changes in temperature and nutrients, which might impact algal blooms and bacterial blooms. And we can dam systems, we can undam systems, which is really going to change the flow and the depth of water as well. We can have changing precipitation events from climate change that will impact the amount of pollutants that enter our waterways at different periods of time. So it can be a really complex system, but the more you're out on your waterways, the more you know how it varies through time. And it gets easier to find what's out of ordinary, even within that normal variation. But to understand that, you do need to know baseline knowledge of our waterways. We partnered with the Water Collaboratory at the University of Pittsburgh, and over a year we created 25 sites that we sampled in each one of the seasons, over 50 different parameters. It did go over 2 years because we started in the fall. But it was an entire year's worth of sampling. And so we put a huge effort into this. You can see our water vessel there. You see us taking samples, bringing it back for analysis, having fun in the lab, having fun on the boat. So it's still a lot of fun out there. We analyzed nutrients, metals, isotopes, suspended solids. We measured pH, temperature, all those types of things. And so when we're looking for nutrients, that's typically non-point and point source pollution, typically from runoff of agriculture, sewage issues. Here in Pittsburgh, we do have combined sewage overflows. Happy to answer any questions about those at the end if you want to know more. We might look for metals, which are typically industry types of pollution, stormwater pollution. And then stable isotopes can be groundwater changes, water source changes. Then we think about sediment loads and stuff like that. So we did a pretty large suite of different types of things. And so if you want to learn more, there's a whole story map for all you data nerds out there. You can dive, you can see every parameter through time, each 25 sites on all 3 rivers. But this is what one tiny little speck of what that data looks like. So this is iron concentrations in the 4th quarter here. And you can see that the Monongahela River does have relatively higher values. of iron compared to the other two rivers. You'll see when the Allegheny and the Monongahela River combine, they have the intermediate levels of iron. It makes a lot of sense. And why this makes sense is because on the Mon River, that's where we had the highest level of steel industry, even historically. And iron is, the main ingredient to steel. So this makes a lot of sense. And we realize that we still are dealing with a lot of legacy pollution in our region. So it's really important for us to understand that not only do we have new and novel chemical contaminants like PFAS contamination, plastics, but we are still, restoring our rivers. We still have historical legacy pollution, and we also still have steel mills on our site as well. So that's something to consider when we think about this. And when we're looking at this data, it's important to note, while I'm not going to show you, I really encourage you to go on and explore the data, that each quarter, each river acted a little differently. So especially for things like nutrients that really had high variability. So we couldn't really pinpoint what river was doing well in some area, like doing well in others, which river wasn't. They all varied through time, and they varied depending on the type of contaminant or water quality parameter we were looking at. So we do know our system is very complex, and one snapshot really isn't going to do it. You need that long-term monitoring to understand the true baseline of our river systems. I also mentioned we do targeted monitoring. So there's our jurisdiction outlined in green. You can see the rivers moving towards the center of that map, which is Pittsburgh. One thing to point out here is that you don't need to be able to read everything. I just want you to see the colors. You see those red dots? There's a lot of them. We set out to identify 25 targeted monitoring points last year. We pulled their compliance data for the Clean Water Act, their compliance data for the Clean Air Act. We pulled their water permits to see what they were allowed to discharge into our waterways. And so we use that data to classify things as high priority for monitoring, medium priority, low priority. And what you're seeing here, the red is the high priority and the yellowish orange is the medium priority. We couldn't reduce it below 37 industries in our region for issues with compliance on their permit and the amount of pollutants that they actually are allowed to put into our waterways. So this was really surprising for us. We've actually have added since this map has been created. And so we have a region that has a lot of potential for contamination if we're not careful and we don't make sure we enforce our clean water laws and hold our polluters accountable. And this is where it gets tricky. So the Department of Environmental Protection is delegated as the enforcer of the Clean Water Act. When we looked at these data of these targeted sites, so just the red sites, what we found was that the average number of non-compliance quarters in the past 3 years, so that's 12 quarters, was 5.6. So they were on average 5.6 quarters, they were non-compliant out of 12, so about half. If we adjust that to a 5-year equivalent, that's 9.3. And I adjusted it because we have another data point that's only available in the 5 years. The average number of formal enforcement actions in 5 years is 2. So non-compliance happened 9.3 times on average per industry, but the average amount of enforcement was only 2. So because of this, we can see that the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act violations are not consistently enforced in our region. And this is where we can step in as a watchdog industry and put pressure on our regulators to hold the polluters accountable. I'm sure you're wondering what are some of our industries that are in our region. We definitely don't have time to go over all of them. And we're just going to pick one that's pretty well known in our region and somewhat new and novel. And that's the Shell cracker plant down in Beaver County on the Ohio River. We do monthly nurdle patrols on this facility, and so those nurdles are tiny plastic pellets. And this ethane cracker plant, what they're doing is they're taking raw liquid natural gas, cracking under high temperature and pressure, and creating tiny little plastic pellets These plastic pellets are about the size of a little nubbin on a Lego, and they produce that product and sell it to be distributed, to be broken down, melted, formed into new plastics. Well, they also can lose their materials, right? They don't want to, they want to sell it. But we have seen, based on other facilities, that indeed items get lost. So we do monthly nurdle patrols, which are plastic pellets that escape into the environment, to monitor for pollution of plastics into our waterways. We also do some water quality sampling with the Water Collaboratory at Pittsburgh, Rivers Quest at West Virginia University, and we work with a lot of partners, especially the Beaver County Marcellus awareness community when we think about community education, advocacy, and outreach. So here is us. We're actually out there. I like to show this picture because this is us out in February. Imagine it's quite cold. And in this day, while it doesn't look that bad, we ended up having to stop the nurdle patrol because our sieve, which we were pouring the water through to collect the nurdles, was freezing and turning into a solid piece of equipment rather than something that filters. So it was really cold that day, but we're still out there. We tried our best, and we have to go out another time when it's not quite as cold. And when we think about those water samples, we are also comparing it to other parts of our baseline. So I talked about we had a lot of baseline data. So here I'm going to show how we might compare that. So here we have 5 different parameters. So pH, chlorine, conductivity, salinity, and total dissolved solids, all of which are water quality parameters that we monitor frequently. And when we look at the Ohio River where Shell is, these are the number of times the site exceeds freshwater standards. So this isn't drinking water standards. This is freshwater, typically associated with aquatic life. We found that pH and chlorine were exceeded the most, but Shell accounted for the majority of those exceedances. So nearly 80% for pH, 65 for chlorine, 66 for conductivity, 67 for salinity, and 67 for total dissolved solids. And so that was the region around Shell. And so it's just something really to note that they're also not always exceeding their permit requirements. So we have to make sure that when industries go out for permit reviews that we ask for stricter standards, because clearly our water quality is being impacted by the amount of allowable pollutants that they're putting into our river systems. That is a source of drinking water. They have had some violations to their permit though, and here is a picture of foam that has come out of the main outfall, and the Department of Environmental Protection did hold them accountable for that. But the reason why I point out this foam is because it's important to note that foam isn't just something that's visually unappealing. Foam, when it's because of surfactants, which is in this case, so non-naturally occurring foam, can actually cover the gills of aquatic life and suffocate them. So, this foam is also just the tip of the iceberg. That's just the surfactants that have been agitated enough to make bubbles, to make that foam. There's so much more that's underwater. So think of it like a sink full of dish soap, soapy water. If you take all the foamy bubbles off, we still know there's still soap in that dishwater. And so we had a lot of back and forth, I'm trying to understand what was happening here. And there was a lot of publicity around, oh, I'm sorry for the visual pollution, it's just foam. And we had to do a lot of pushback and educating the community that foam is not just foam. It's caused by a particular pollutant in our waterways, and that's just part of the result of what that pollutant can do. We also monitor things like their stormwater issues. And so we are working with Environmental Integrity Project and the Beaver County Marcellus Awareness Community and the Mountain Watershed Association, exploring their self-reporting data around their stormwater, which they do not have limits on, but we're going to be hoping that eventually there will be limits to that, because we see certain outfalls like outfall 16 that exceeds really high levels that normally wouldn't be permitted. So They discharged 100 times the human health criteria from that outfall when it'd be thinking about thallium, which can affect the lung, heart, liver, kidneys. If a large amount is consumed, it can cause temporary issues like hair loss, vomiting, diarrhea. Overall, it's not really a good thing to come in contact with, but yet we're seeing large discharges. And so we're monitoring that and really pushing the Department of Environmental Protection to really enforce clean water laws around that. Sometimes when we're doing targeted monitoring, we find things out of the unexpected or out of not what we would typically see. Here is a picture of a weird looking plastic pellet, which would be a nurdle in the environment. There are a variety of sizes, variety of shapes, much larger than normal. One day when we were monitoring and patrolling around Shell, we were working with Mountain Watershed, and we actually found odd-shaped pellets. We eventually traced it back to not Shell, but another plastics manufacturer just across Raccoon Creek, their neighbor, Styropek, which I'll talk a little bit more about in the advocacy end. We also monitor spills and major incidents. Here in our region, we had one that happened recently in 2022, a Norfolk Southern train with 9 cars containing petroleum distillates and plastic pellets, those nurdles, derailed. So 17 in total derailed, but 9 went into the Allegheny tributary, Guys Run, right at the mouth, right where it enters the Allegheny River. The petroleum distillates were removed from the water. We have been doing monitoring around the site, and they're still in the sediment, but they're doing soil remediation right now. But unfortunately, pre-production plastic pellets, those nurdles, were removed by a hydrovac, but a lot of them escaped to improper use of the booming system. And this is one of the issues that we have, is these plastic pellets aren't taken seriously and enter our waterways, and they're starting to become ubiquitous in nature. In fact, when you have those plastic pellets, they're small, easy to break down into microplastics, and that can enter our drinking water. And those aren't relatively easily cleaned out of our drinking water. So it's really important when we take them out of our ecosystem. They also look like tiny, tasty little morsels for aquatic life and can really cause a lot of damage to aquatic life as well. We do additional monitoring, and here is the East Palestine train derailment, which we have done some sediment sampling, water sampling around the region. All the streams that have been impacted in this region eventually do flow down into the Ohio River into Pennsylvania. So we found it important to help and respond to community requests to take some water samples in the region to help them understand what's contaminated and how and what levels. We did find evidence that there is a lot of contamination in the soil sediment in Sulphur Run, which is right near the derailment. And our levels were higher than the Environmental Protection Agency's release levels at a nearby site. We did not say that those levels were wrong, what they reported, because different sites can vary in contamination based on the soil sediment and the ability for it to absorb contamination, how rocky it was, the flow, the depth, all those things. But we do know that at a minimum, there's really high hotspots of contamination in this region, one of which we sampled for. And everyone's going to have different levels of exposure. And we're really pushing for better understanding of what the community's risk is to exposure of these contaminants and helping them get the support they need for, a life of recovery after this derailment. So that's on the water. It's a lot of stuff. It's kind of the nuts and bolts of the work that we do. We're really out there speaking for the water. And so when we go back to our 3 buckets, I'm now going to talk a little bit about community work that we do. And so how we use the science that we're pulling to help the community understand the importance of water protection. Well, first we do it because we really want to connect people to our land activity, to understand how land activities impact water quality. We want to talk about the relevant pollution issues that are with our rivers. We want to amplify our right to clean water, and we want to promote stewardship. We also want to change the way we think about these waters. Our rivers are not just something that we look at from a distance. They're amazing, abundant resource. Water is the reason that we can be here to sustain life. If we don't have clean water, we can't survive. And there's only so much we can do to clean our water. These rivers do supply our drinking water. Now, yes, water utilities take it up, clean it. They charge you to clean it, even though the industry is the one who's polluting it, because as a ratepayer, you have to pay for your water. But what happens when they can't clean everything out of the water? What happens when it becomes too expensive to clean our water? And we have to really pay attention to that. We have to want clean water for us as drinking water sources, for our wildlife, for our plants, for our healthy ecosystems, and for us to just connect with water and have the natural restorative powers that water can bring for us. And we really promote a lot of that connection through our Three Rivers Ambassador program. We do Three Rivers Watch, where we teach people on how to spot and report pollution. We teach people water ecology, and we try to connect people to our waterways through a variety of programming that's focused on art and connection. And again, we do stewardship, so plantings, cleanups. We work with partners a lot on that kind of work, and we really help to get people out on and along our rivers to really show the love for them that we have. You can check out our events at throughwk.org/events, capital E. And you can have a fun time with us. I really encourage you to do it. We're not all just like pollution, gloom and doom. We love our rivers, and we want to share that love. They're the most amazing things in our region, and they have so much abundance of life to offer us. And it's really important that we remember that, and we don't let industries take our clean water from us. And if you're interested in really becoming your local water keeper who spots and report pollutions, I encourage you to sign up for one of our Three Rivers Watch programs. We can't be everywhere at once. There's too many miles. We're a small team, and we really rely on the support from our community members to be out there looking at the rivers. You know your favorite water spots the best. You'll know when something changes, and we can be that community organization that responds for you. Maybe even you don't think it's water pollution. You're just not sure. Something's different. You don't feel comfortable reporting it to the Department of Environmental Protection. But if you let us know, we can go take a look and see if it's pollution. So we can be that intermediate for you. And so when you're out there, I'm going to give you a little primer. What are you looking for? Well, we're looking for industrial pollution, changes to the rock substrate, dredging, coal ash floating everywhere, coal dust floating everywhere. You can see those rocks are really discolored. Those are things we're looking for that might say that, hey, there's a lot going into our waters that shouldn't be. We're looking for foam. Now it can occur naturally or indicate pollution. And so that's where we can come in and take some water samples and figure that out and determine whether it's pollution or naturally occurring. We look for sheens or textures on the water. It could be fuel, adhesive, and sometimes we don't know, and we have to do some testing to figure it out. We look for habitat degradation, so invasive species, materials pollution, dredging, that kind of stuff. And then we look for biological responses, so fish kills are great biological responses. Something is wrong, the water quality is off. Algal blooms, bacterial blooms, those are all signs that something is not right in our waterways. We also look for acid mine drainage, and this is what most people are familiar with, especially the left side, which is that orange coppery color. Everyone knows that if you're from southwestern PA, you know that's acid mine drainage, but it can also look white. And this is a great picture because it has both coming in. It just depends on the type of rock it's mixing with. And that's what we see there. And so if you're really interested in getting involved, these are just some of the events that are coming up. Again, go to our website, check them out. We have some opportunities to get on our boat on July 11th. If you want to connect with nature in that unique way and feel, connected through art. We have an art-based project on the 24th. You can learn how to advocate for your water on the August 5th, or you can come out kayaking with us on August 10th. And finally, I'm now going to talk about our last little bucket of work, and that's through advocacy. We like to think of this as the big aspect to our work. We take the evidence of the pollution on the water programs, the science of the baseline water quality monitoring, the partnerships with the big science labs at the universities. We take that with our empowered and educated communities. We amplify those voices. We use all of the stuff we're collecting. We use the community, that grassroots movement, and we hold those polluters accountable. We put pressure on our environmental regulators to enforce our clean water laws, to demand that we don't deregulate our clean water laws. In fact, we'd like to see stricter clean water laws. We really advocate for clean water for our future generations. So what does that look like? Well, the first thing I keep talking about is we have a right to clean water. As a Pennsylvanian, if you are a Pennsylvanian, we have a Bill of Rights, and one is clean air, pure water. And that should be our inherent right as a Pennsylvanian. And we serve as a scientific legal advocate to protect that. We use the Clean Water Act, which is federal legislation to protect our waterways. We use the PA Clean Stream laws as well. We use the Safe Drinking Water Act. There's also other types of acts that we can use in our toolbox, like the Threatened and Endangered Species Act. And so we can use a variety of different tools to advocate for our waterways. And we advocate through a few buckets. One is we want to prevent pollution. First and foremost, we just don't want to see it. Second, we have to enforce the current regulation. When pollution happens, someone needs to be held accountable. We want to decrease pollution allowances. We want to continue to improve our water quality in our region. And those three things fall under two types of work. Typically, we pay attention to rulemakings and do comments. We go to hearings. We pay attention to permits, which is the fancy NPDES looking word there. Those are the water quality permits, what industries are allowed to put into our waterways. Focus on zoning permits, do a lot of legal research. And so this is a lot of behind the books, legal stuff, as well as some front-facing community work. And when all of that doesn't work, we hold polluters accountable. This is where we pressure regulators to uphold the Clean Water Act. And if they don't do it, we step in and use the citizen suit provision of the Clean Water Act, which allows community members and community organizations impacted by the pollution to sue the industry for their pollution event. And that's through litigation. It's expensive, it's time consuming, it's last resort, but we will do it. So current advocacy, we do a lot of things, constantly doing comment writing, formal comments. We have lobby days, lawsuits, appeals, rallies, sign-on letters, call to actions. And last year we had 76 actions we took. And so far to date, we're at 45. So we're looking to surpass last year. And so really pay attention to our social media when we do call to actions and help us out to protect our clean water. Now, I don't know if you remember, but I alluded to when we were out on a nurdle patrol once, we found these funny looking nurdles. They were tiny, out of the ordinary, and we traced them back to Styropec, which is a facility that takes tiny little plastic pellets, puffs them up, and turns them into styrofoam. And so we finally traced them back to there. And every month, we submitted a complaint to our Department of Environmental Protection because we were out doing nurdle patrols. We were finding these plastic pellets. They were in our waters, sometimes uncountable. And month after month for a year, we submitted these complaints. We even reached out to Styropec to let them know they were polluting, just in case they weren't aware, and could give themselves time to fix it. Well, they did receive notices of violation from the Department of Environmental Protection, but it came with no teeth. There was no requirements for change. There was no financial penalty. Basically, they were just alerted to the problem. And after a year, we decided we're going to file an intent to sue. Styropec, our partners, and with Penn Environment joined us in this fight. They also were wanting to fight against the plastic pollution in our waterways, and were represented by the National Environmental Law Center. We are in current litigation with them to date, As officially on December 5th, we filed the lawsuit. We are negotiating. They are working towards a solution and mitigation efforts. As of right now, we are hopeful that we're going to get a good outcome and prevent future plastic pollution in the region. But again, current litigation can only answer a few questions about that, but we are hopeful for an outcome that's going to protect our waterways from future pollution. We also will appeal things that we disagree with, such as the EPA's decision to permit a new injection well in Allegheny County in Plum. This would be this industry's second injection well, which would take radioactive, highly contaminated fracking wastewater and inject it into the ground. This would be the second one. The first one failed within the first year from cracked casing, and it's still operations after a fix. Fracking waste is just something horrible to contend with. We don't want it in our drinking water. Radioactive water should not be allowed to be pushed into our into the well. We disagree that this place is suitable as an injection well. And so with Protect PT, we are appealing this permit to protect the community members in that area, as well as our downstream neighbors on the Allegheny River and in the Ohio River Basin. We also do work with defending our climate. I don't know if you're aware, but climate impacts water quality. A lot of people think about just air quality when they think about climate, but water is the forgotten impact. Here in our region, we are expected to see increased periods of rain followed by periods of drought. What happens in this landscape when there's periods of drought followed by intense rain is that even our lawns, which can absorb water, are so dried up they act as concrete, and everything just flows fast right into the water, picking all the contaminants up and not cleaned. Not only that, our stormwater gets inundated, and all of a sudden we're dumping sewage into our waterways because we have a combined sewage overflow that has a max capacity, and when that exceeds, which happens often when it rains, it goes directly into our waterways, and we now have sewage, untreated sewage, laden with bacteria in our water. So it's really important to understand those impacts. Not only that, industries have more stormwater than they can handle, which is picking up contaminants on their landscape, as well as homes being inundated. Personally, they can people can be really impacted by this change in climate. And so we find it really important to advocate for strict regulations and future changes to what we do as a society that's going to mitigate those impacts of climate change. And if you're interested in seeing the work that we do with climate change, please go onto the site that's on the screen and sign up to receive notices about things that we're doing in the community. Come hang out with us when we volunteer to do work around it. We'd love to see you involved in that as well. And so first, I just want to say, before I close off and open up to things, thank you so much for taking your time out on a Monday evening after a holiday, and maybe you even worked this weekend, so thank you for doing that. We do have some reports and things like that I have random links on this webpage for you to go take a little picture with your phone, check it out, or just go on our website, explore what we have to offer. We'd love to see you at an event or follow us on social media and join the clean water movement in our region and help us protect our most valuable resource, our water. Let's take back the water and own it, and help future generations have clean water. So on that note, I'm going to open up to questions and maybe stop sharing.
Yes. So our first question is interested in learning about how you went from researching the I'm gonna butcher this, Sonoran Desert. I'm gonna guess when you're in Southern California to working for waterkeepers.
That's a great question. So I've always been an environmental enthusiast. And so when I went to grad school to get my PhD, I did a lot of research in a variety of deserts. One was the Coachella Valley. I also worked in Joshua Tree National Park. I did small mammal and ground dwelling arthropod, which are bugs that walk on the ground, research on how they responded to fire and invasive grass species. So I've always been really interested in what happens when humans impact environments. I've never really cared what critters I'm looking at, as long as I'm looking at a lot of critters, or, you know, what the questions are. I wanted to do applied research. And so I initially started doing work with nonprofits, moved to South Carolina, worked with Audubon, South Carolina, got really involved in their native plants program and how we can change communities one step at a time. And I started working more in the community. So I was taking all this knowledge I developed in grad school, this really critical deep dive thinking, and I found that I loved applying it. I had this way of being able to apply research, which happens so much faster than academia, and I'm a fast-paced person, so that appealed to me so much to be able to change the pace of my work. And so I got really involved with that, and then that was a termed position, so similar to like a postdoc or something. It had an end, and I went on to work with the Nature Conservancy in South Carolina, and so I worked from the coast up to the southern Blue Ridge Mountains there, doing conservation assessments of conservation easements. And there I got lots of different types of habitat exposure and interest, and really expanded the skill set that I had, and really started thinking about whole ecosystems and different ways to use science to conserve and protect habitat and ecosystems for future generations. So I really started to find my niche, and while I loved research, I loved applying it so much more. And I can use my love for thinking deeply by applying the research that I've learned, and I can hear about and read about other people's research. I am from Western Pennsylvania. My husband is too. We had a kid in South Carolina, and we wanted to come home. And I had a great opportunity with Carnegie Museum of Natural History in their science section, and just really got to dive into some leadership roles and stuff there, and kind of knew I wanted to be an executive director, and really make some change in our community. I did want to dive deeper into advocacy, which in my past roles I wasn't able to dive into, and that was always really hard for me because I felt for systemic change I needed to advocate for something. I can't just operate in my science world. I needed to go beyond that, beyond the community that is invested. I need to work with a community that's not invested. I need to advocate, change people's minds, help people move towards something. And that kind of led me to the clean water movement. And I haven't looked back since. I love this space. I hope to never leave. And I think it's just the perfect fit of critical thinking with science, but also being able to see change happen and really positive experiences in a relatively short period of time compared to academia.
Yeah, excellent. So we've got two similar questions. So both Kitty and Anna interested in how the Supreme Court's recent decision regarding the overturn of the Chevron document is going to impact Three River Waterways work.
Yeah, that's a great question. That recent decision, so those who don't know, this overturn is basically allowing for when the law can be interpreted. So not things that are clearly defined, like our permits that I talked about, they're clearly defined. They have specific limits, so that won't impact them. What's going to impact is when clean water laws are interpreted. And typically, what that decision in the past has allowed is that our environmental protection agencies, the scientists, are allowed to understand how the law should be interpreted to protect the environment. This overturn is now taking away that interpretation ability from the EPA, the scientists, the one who writes these laws, writes the environmental laws, and moves it into the judge's ability to interpret the law that they may or may not have knowledge of. So we are concerned about it when it comes to some of the other toolkits that we might have. So outside of the permitting allowances and things like that, other types of interpretation can definitely be impacted in the future. We don't know exactly what that's going to look like and how often it'll impact, but it's definitely something on our radar and we're concerned about.
No, thank you. Question from Todd. Do you feel that the DEP does not do more enforcement because of staffing issues or because they're influenced by industries to the level that they should be protecting the environment for citizens?
That's a great question. And, I don't know the answer for sure, but they are most certainly understaffed. They do have to pick and choose what things they can investigate and how much time they have to enforce. So that is most certainly one of the main reasons. And we've seen in both the DEP and the US EPA, a lot of these environmental protection offices slowly get cut with resources. So we have more industry in our region, we have more problems, more people, and less staff to actually enforce those. So that is definitely the main reason. Now, sometimes we do feel like maybe we're not as important as the industry, but we've had some positive interactions with the DEP as well, and they can help us understand why they might not be doing something. They are being a good player in our litigation case against Styropec and has has allowed us to pursue that. So I think it's a really complex answer, and I think it depends on the industry and leadership at the time.
Yes, excellent. And so another question from Kitty. Is 3OW accredited or legally recognized by government agencies like the EPA?
Uh, no, we are not accredited to do water analysis. So if we take water samples, we do send it out to accredited labs, if we would like to do that. But as a laboratory, we are not accredited. We have no plans to do that. Technically, they really encourage third party anyway. So if we would get accredited, we would be still considered biased, so it wouldn't really work for us. But luckily, we do have labs in the area that are accredited. We can also still use our data, it's just used a little differently. And so our data isn't like thrown out or anything like that. We'd have to testify how we got it, what it does to it, why we're qualified to do that test. And then we would also usually have a support and evidence of, a certified lab.
All right, Chris is interested in your monitoring of stable isotopes and asks, what can this monitoring show us about our rivers?
Yeah, the monitoring and the stable isotopes can show a variety of different things. And it really depends on which isotope, but it can kind of figure out, when the pollution was, what type of pollution it is, what we might see in future changes and things like that. And so it is an area that's not as explored as it could be, but definitely on our baseline water quality monitoring effort with the Water Collaborative of Pittsburgh, they created a story map that can really dive into what it might mean by some of the findings that we had with that.
Wonderful. And so kind of a fitting question here after some of these in the presentation. In your professional opinion, are Pittsburgh's rivers safe for swimming and fishing?
Most of the time. So it's really important that if you want to have body contact, that you pay attention for overflows. So you can sign up for soak alerts from Alcosan, so they'll tell you when there might be a potential for overflows happening in our region. Follow us on social media. Once a week, we do E. coli testing to see if it's safe for body contact, and we have 5 sites that we test. So pay attention for Fridays. We'll tell you if it's a green light or a go light, depending on the location. You want to avoid body contact when there's E. coli in the water, and that's coming from feces. And that's mainly because if you have a cut or an open sore in your body, you can get infected. People are immunocompromised, it can make you sick, and nobody wants to do that anyway. So we just avoid body contact with those. You can still recreate on a vessel and not do body contact. We can just be patient after really heavy rain and not make body contact. Now, when we talk about fishing, that's a hard question to answer. There's kind of the Department of Environmental Protection, the U.S. Fish and Boat, Fish and Game, they all have recommendations on depending where you're fishing, what you're fishing for, how much you can eat. So it really depends. The other side is that we have to remember when we eat fish, even from the supermarket, they tend to bioaccumulate contaminants in their muscle that we eat. So saying that, you shouldn't eat fish from our rivers ever or regardless, we'd have to think about that with almost every fish because they're exposed to other contaminants as well. So take it with a grain of salt. Follow the expected guidelines, especially if you're someone who is immunocompromised or anything like that. But there's definitely people who fish in our rivers. A lot of them for fun, some people for food. And there's some sources online that you can get that kind of help you navigate what's best for you. I think you're muted. Sorry.
I am. We knew we'd do it once. It's fine. So those were all of our questions. Thank you so much to our audience. Those were excellent questions to end us off with. So thank you again to uh, Dr. Hulton VanTassel for sharing some of the awesome work that you do to help keep our rivers safe so that we can all enjoy them. Thank you so much to our audience for your attendance and your interest, and we hope that we will see you again next month on August 5th for our next Cafe Sci. So, oh, do we have, okay, we've got a very big thank you very much. So,
Thank
wonderful.
you.
Thank you, and everyone have a wonderful evening.
You too. Thank you all.